All right, hello, welcome everyone to Critique Revolve, Rayman Digital's exclusive movie, television, and media podcast. I am Michael, your host, and in the studio today to talk about a very intriguing, bloody, and disturbing film is David. Hello, Dave.
How's it going, everybody?
Okay, Dave. So we are going to be breaking down, discussing, analyzing The Substance. What is The Substance? It's a 2024 body horror film co-produced, written, and directed by Coralie Fargeat. The film stars Demi, Margaret, Qualley, and Dennis Quaid. It is an international co-production between the United Kingdom and France with a running time of 140 minutes. Its plot follows a fading celebrity who decides to use a black market drug, a cell-replicating substance that temporarily creates a younger, better version of herself. Air quotes. Unknowingly giving her horrifying side effects. Keyword horrifying.
Horrifying.
We are going to try very hard to keep this spoiler-free, because this is the type of film that has various twists and turns. Not that it's a gimmicky narrative, but it relies heavily on the tension and psychological unraveling of its characters.
Yes.
And if we're not careful, we can ruin this movie.
Easily.
And I don't want to do that, because this is one of those films, I should preface, that is either going to be loved or hated. And if you love it, I don't want to ruin it for you. So we're going to be careful, right, Dave?
Oh, no, absolutely. Because, especially with this being a quote-unquote horror film, horror films the stories in horror films can be very easily spoiled.
Oh, yeah.
You can spoil this movie in about a sentence.
Yeah.
And that's
really can.
That doesn't say that this is a bad film. There's a lot going on in this film that I really did and was really surprised that the filmmaker, Coralie Fargeat, was able to put into the film.
I am impressed with what was put together. It is an art house horror film.
Yes.
But I don't want that to deter traditional horror fans, because it is accessible to all fans of horror.
Even to mass audiences, I would say give this movie a shot, because there's a lot that it has to say. And I think that under the veneer of the body horror background that basically is going on in the film, the story itself is actually very well done.
Yeah, it is. Fargeat builds an atmosphere of dread and body horror while also maintaining a sense of unpredictability throughout. And that's the reason why I want to make sure we stay away from spoilers.
Yes.
And I don't want to ruin that experience for anyone. But we will carefully discuss our impressions and interpretations while doing our best not to bleed into plot specifics. Okay, so at its surface, The Substance is a body horror using its genre conventions in traditional ways, right? While also subverting it in other ways. Looking deeper, it is an intense, hyperbolic look into the culture of beauty. And the culture of beauty often intersects with the concept of the body as a fetish object. As I said, I'm hesitant to say this is an art house film, because I don't want to turn people away who are not interested in horror films with an artistic flair, but the film's methodical art house approach is undeniable. The Substance meticulously blends psychological horror with striking visuals, using its slow burn narrative to explore deeper themes of identity, self-worth, and societal pressure. While it embraces many of the conventions of the body horror, such as transformation, mutilation, and bodily decay, it also subverts them by using these elements to comment on the obsessive pursuit of beauty and youth. The film's art house sensibilities now come through in its pacing and visual symbolism, but it remains accessible, delivering enough tension, in my opinion, and shocking moments to appeal to a broader horror audience.
Yeah.
David, what are your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts on The Substance was I was really anticipating this film since I saw its trailer maybe about half a year ago. And I was really, really excited to see this film solely because Coralie Fargeat is part of that crop of filmmakers that came from Shudder Films who basically they're the new wave of horror filmmakers. And her debut from Revenge was very well done with a very simple story, and she was able to show that as a filmmaker, she could take something simple but give some substance, in quotations, to the story. And when this first came out, a lot of things got me excited, especially with the choice of cinematographer. You had two actors who have not seen much work these past years that are absolutely fantastic, and Demi Moore,
forgotten icons.
Yeah, and Dennis Quaid.
Mm-hmm.
And to get those two people in a, just like what you said, this is an art house type of film, was really impressive. So that definitely dropped on my radar, because if you were to look at like the bones of what Coralie Fargeat was working with in The Substance, you could easily see them getting some unknown actors to fill in those roles. But because you got Demi Moore and Dennis Quaid involved in this film, it kind of boosted your cast grade because you have that veteran appearance.
Yeah, it brought it closer to the mainstream realm.
And it really paid in dividends with bringing in at least those two cast, because bringing those two actors in absolutely made the other actors shine in the film.
Yeah. Yeah, and just because this is a movie dealing with beauty, I will say that Demi Moore is amazing looking still.
Yes, for like, I think she's 59.
She is absolutely gorgeous. She is fantastic looking. It's a shame that her career stalled. I know there are allegedly some sexist reasons behind why her career stalled. Apparently after Striptease, that seems to be the big article and area of discussion surrounding this film, is the issues of her career stalling and her pointing to instances pertaining to the development and reception of Striptease. So, all right. So in order to grasp fully what this film is saying, we need to define the culture of beauty. Then combine those parameters with the conventions of the body horror, along with the notion of the body as fetish object and the concept of the doppelganger in horror. And that will be an effective way to give our impressions of the film and also convey meaning and intent without actually spoiling the film for anyone. That's a lot, what we just went through, those theories. It's a lot. Body horror, culture of beauty, fetish object, and doppelganger. But it goes to show you that the director of this film and her team were coming from a place of deep filmic knowledge and understanding of film.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what is the culture of beauty? It typically refers to the societal norms, values, and beliefs that define and promote specific standards of physical appearance as desirable or ideal. It is shaped by media, advertising, cultural traditions, and social expectations, often emphasizing traits like youthfulness, symmetry. I want you guys to highlight that word mentally, because symmetry is a big part of its visual appeal, in my opinion, when you're looking at the cinematography. Also, the culture of beauty entails clear skin or certain body types, and they often influence self-perception, body image, and consumer behavior. We see this in mass in today's culture. In fact, it's intensified globally since the rise of connected media. So it's a very relevant topic. Now, taking that notion and combining it with body horror, where the body is fetishized, more about the film's intent is illuminated. For example, the culture of beauty often intersects with the concept of the body as fetish object, where specific physical features or idealized forms become objectified and commodified. Right now, people probably can figure out that I'm talking about Hollywood in a lot of ways. And that's what this movie is doing. It's speaking about culture broadly, but if you were to streamline this down to the plot of this movie, the lead protagonist, played by Demi Moore, is an aging actor or entertainer of sorts. So it fits in that entire pantheon of discussions when it comes to the culture of beauty. In essence, the framework reduces the body to a series of parts, whether it's flawless skin, a particular body shape, or other traits that are celebrated, desired, and marketed as symbols of beauty and status. Now, interestingly, David, in most cases, or many cases, the body as a fetish object feeds into a cycle of consumption, which is a big part of the body horror genre, where individuals are encouraged to alter or enhance their appearance to meet idealized standards. So you can see now where something like that firmly works within the culture of beauty. Lastly, we can take the myth of the doppelganger and derive more meaning. For context, the doppelganger mythos is one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah.
And in horror, it usually refers to the concept of a double or mirror image of a character, often embodying a sinister or unsettling presence. It's rooted in folklore. I believe Joseph Campbell has gone into detail with these types of myths.
Yeah.
The doppelganger is often seen as an omen of death or misfortune, and ultimately symbolizing the darker, another key aspect, hidden aspects of the self.
For the layman out there, it's basically, like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story.
There you go.
That's the thing that basically is the doppelganger. The doppelganger genre, anything dealing with transformations, and even down to like the werewolf mythology, something like that, where it's basically the human becoming more than just human. It
is a common component within the Gothic horror specifically. It's used broadly, but it is often attached to the subgenre of the Gothic.
Yes.
And in horror films, Dave, usually the mythos plays with themes of identity, duality, and the uncanny, which you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
How this relates to the substance becomes obvious.
Yes.
The protagonist's younger, perfected version can be seen as a doppelganger, embodying the external beauty society demands while also harboring a darker, more dangerous presence beneath. The doppelganger not only deceives, but actively seeks to harm its original, which quite effectively demonstrates and symbolizes how the pursuit of perfection can become self-destructive.
Yeah.
And I would argue that this element heightens the horror in the substance, as the protagonist is not just battling an external force, but an internal manifestation of her deepest insecurities and societal pressures. And that's where the film excels.
Yes.
In the dissection of the self and its relation to the culture of beauty.
That's the thing that is really strong, can be a really strong anchor for any basically doppelganger type of storytelling, is like, you don't make it about two individuals. It's about oneself.
Yeah.
And that's where I was looking at what also just technically with how the actors, Demi Moore and I think it's Margaret Qualley.
That's how I'd say it. Yeah.
Qualley. How they react to each other. And it was amazing to me that they got it together to basically, in essence, play the same character in two different skins, because that's what they were doing. It's very easy for the doppelganger, a bad doppelganger film, to all of a sudden be, it's just two separate entities.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I like about here is like the story focuses on trying to show.
It's not about creating a separation or
it's not
distinction.
about creating a separation. It's creating a similarities between the two.
It's showing that the self can be its worst enemy in a lot of
Yes.
ways, which you are right, David. Oftentimes, doppelganger myths in horror films, in the run-of-the-mill horror films, they don't use it properly. And the idea of it being a complete separate entity pretty much nullifies the entire purpose behind the mythos.
That's where you get like bad horror films. You know, like the Dr. Jekyll and Miss Hyde type of Miss Hyde of storytelling.
Yeah. Whereas this sticks pretty close to the origins of the myth. That's why I said at the top of the show, David, that the director and the crew, they know what they're doing. This isn't just, you know what, I'm going to try my hand at body horror and see what happens. This director is from an intellectual school of thought when it comes to movies. She understands what she's doing. This isn't just, oh, I got lucky and I happened to touch on the culture of beauty, doppelganger, the body as the fetish object. No, these are things that it's hard to deny because this film is so well constructed and put together. It's hard to just accept that this was a director fumbling through all these aspects of theory simply by accident.
Yeah.
So in essence, what we end up getting in this movie is a detailed critique of the obsessive pursuit of beauty and perfection in modern society. That's really what the movie is about at its core. And everything we've just moved through over the last 20 minutes has nothing to do with plot. This is just the impressions that we can gather from the movie and then that we can share with people. And that's the awesome thing about this movie, because I was thinking about it, David, a couple days ago. How are we going to review this without spoilers? Because this type of movie, it can be ruined by spoilers.
Yeah.
And I almost thought, well, maybe we should just wait and delay this until after the movie comes out so that we don't run the risk of ruining it for anyone. But then I realized, you know what? The best angle or approach to take in tackling this film is the obvious. Let's talk about the theories behind this specific film.
Exactly. That's where I was at after we viewed the film, because it was kind of like I didn't know how to break down this film without really focusing on the story and basically the whole, as like what you said, the spoiler aspect of the story, because like the movie itself is tailored for that. It's tailored for people to talk about what they just saw.
Right.
So in reviewing it, well, how do you actually go past that? And then it actually dawned on me, no, let's focus on like what the filmmaker is trying to say.
Yeah, the symptomatic meaning, essentially, is what we're talking about here. And listen, we've bypassed the plot because, believe it or not, everything we've talked about does not tell you what happens plot-wise. Now, narratively speaking, the film is written within the context of similar horror films. It subverts as far as, you know, the big strokes are concerned, but more or less, as is the case with most genre pictures, the film stays in that familiar territory of the body horror.
Yeah.
Now, the narrative pace increases within the final quarter of the film, almost alarmingly so. In fact, my biggest concerns about this movie have to do with the absurdities and liberties the narrative takes towards the end.
Yeah.
I understand what the director was doing. And I said this to the PR, our PR department. I understand what the director was doing. You know, having the notion of absurdism playing a key role makes sense. When the protagonist's reality spirals into chaos, it works, but I'm thinking a lot of viewers will feel conflicted.
Conflicted, yeah.
Maybe not ruin the film. I'm trying to be careful not to spoil things. So I'm going to save the rest of this thought for the spoiler section. But I will say that is my biggest problem with the movie is the final 30 minutes. And it kind of starts to feel like this is just a common problem with lots of movies nowadays, because if you look at the running time, it's an hour and 40 minutes. I don't feel like the movie
was out of 40 minutes.
Well, that says something about the film and how it's written. You are right. It does go by pretty fast. But also, David, did the movie need to be 140 minutes.
Exactly.
Because to me, those last 25, 30 minutes is when the movie arguably, air quotes, because this is my own opinion, kind of falls off the rails.
Well, because it should have actually, in the final 20 or so minutes, I think me and you and even a couple other reviewers that I talked to said, like, it felt like it should have actually started tapering off. Like you get your epilogue, right?
Right.
But instead, the Fargeat decides to go, we're not just going to do an epilogue. We're going to actually go down and then go up again and then have what people, you and me are not the only ones talking about the absurdity type of storytelling. And the only defense I've been coming up with is this is something that that it didn't bother me much because I'm used to seeing it in horror films.
Right.
I'm used to seeing absurd narrative in horror films because you get to that point in the end where, quote unquote, the monster must be destroyed, right? Because that's all how horror films go. You have the monster introduced, and then all of a sudden the monster has to be destroyed in the end. That is a stereotypical arc of narrative in horror films.
Yeah.
And it feels like Fargeat was trying to get that way because, at the end of the day, she is telling a horror film story.
Yeah.
And it didn't bother me much, but I feel it takes away from the first part of the story because it takes away the impact of the first 60 to 70 minutes of her story.
Yeah, I think you could tell, David, because we were sitting together, obviously, at the theater, and you could tell when the movie started to lose me, because I was enthralled. I even usually I don't lean over and say things about the movie, but I even said, "Man, this movie's shot so amazing! Like it's just symbolically perfect."
Yeah.
And then my whole entire body, my demeanor changed as the movie approached the ending because I felt like you took this high quality film that I believe could have been Oscar material.
Yes.
And there is still going on currently right now from early screenings, critics saying that this can in fact be Oscar bait type. This is an Oscar bait type of film. And I don't know if I agree with that. If the last 20 minutes didn't happen the way it did, and we will talk about that in the spoiler section, specifically what happened, but it reminds me of the issues I had with American Psycho. I love that movie. It's a classic film at this point. But those last, 15, 20 minutes that slips into absurdity.
Goes all off the rails.
I've watched that film probably a half a dozen times, maybe more. And every time I still don't get used to the way the movie ended. I don't like it. I feel like you tarnish your film. That doesn't mean I don't get what the director was attempting to do. I just don't feel like it works. Now, whether or not that's the case with this movie, the substance, I think time will only tell.
Yeah.
First watch, I will have to say that my knee-jerk reaction is I don't think the last 30 minutes works in the film's favor. But who knows? Maybe 6 months from now, if I watch the movie again, that might change. But I am curious to see what the mainstream says about it. Typically, they don't seem to be bothered. Horror fans don't seem to be bothered by those types of things. Mm-hmm. However, if we are talking about an Oscar picture, the Academy typically does not nominate things that end the way this movie ends.
Yeah, because the problem with a lot of times when it comes to
stylistically, not content-wise, stylistically,
and that's the issue why you don't see a lot of quote-unquote genre pieces being nominated for Academy Awards because
Correct.
A lot of people, I always hear from people who aren't into art films and film theory like you and me, mm-hmm. where basically people don't understand, well, why isn't this nominated? This was such a good film. And I'm going, it's not nominated because, it's a good film. But when you look at the craftsmanship about 20% or 30% of the film, That's what Academy and critics are actually looking at.
Yeah.
It's the quote unquote, not to actually steal the title of the film, but it's the substance of the film that basically puts it over into Academy Awards winning. It's what separates films like The Godfather to Lord of the Rings. You know, everyone remembers that Lord of the Rings. I remember during that time, everyone said, my God, Peter Jackson should be nominated for all three of the films. And he never got nominated till Return of the King.
Mm-hmm.
And you could make the argument the Lord of the Rings, the first one, The Fellowship of the Ring, should have been nominated, but it was nominated because of the substance that was there. Everyone was looking at it and basically saying, yeah, he did a fantastic job. But at the end of the day, 20% of that film is still kind of not in the craftsman genre. It's not in the craftsman workhouse.
Many of the members of the Academy, and this is not a negative because I'm okay with elitists, they're elitists. And they have a very specific artist elitists, filmmaking elitists. They have a specific way of how they view films and what should be and what should not be nominated. Now, I will say that Demi Moore very well could be nominated.
I think so.
I don't know if the film itself would be considered because of some of those narrative aspects we were talking about on the tail end of the film, but I can easily see Demi Moore being nominated as a best acting category.
Yes.
And I can also see Dennis Quaid being nominated for supporting because not only was this Demi Moore's one of her best movies understandably she hasn't done anything big in years, but let's pretend there wasn't a career gap. This is one of her stronger films.
Yeah.
In terms of performance. Absolutely. The amount of emotion and what she puts into it and what emerges is the stuff that people talk about. It is good. Dennis Quaid, also the stuff people talk about. He didn't have a big role, but he was dispersed throughout the entire film, so his presence was there. And I would also say that it's very possible that he could also be considered for a nominee for Best Supporting. Dennis Quaid fucking owned it.
Every time he was on the screen, it was amazing.
Every time. He is the perfect conceptualization of a douche.
Of
a Hollywood douche.
Executive douche.
Yeah. So good. That's another place where this film excels. The acting, the performances, there isn't a bad performance in this movie.
The way I feel about Dennis Quaid's performance is the same way I feel about Tom Cruise's performance in Tropic Thunder. Oh, and he was nominated for Tropic Thunder.
I thought you were going to say Magnolia. Do you remember Tom Cruise's performance in Magnolia?
Magnolia,
Respect the cock and tame the cunt.
But Tropic Thunder, where Tom Cruise got nominated for that one, easily Dennis Quaid should be nominated for The Substance because he not only played the role of a stereotypical Hollywood douche to a T, but he made the character not it's very easy to make that character forgettable. Dennis Quaid made that character literally every time he's on scene, he owned it.
Yeah.
He is owning this scene even over Margaret Qualley, who I love the interplay between the two because Margaret Qualley's character is more demure, she's more shy. Here's this bombastic character, and it makes him even more monstrous in a lot of scenes that he's in.
Yeah.
and you walk away from the scenes kind of not just terrified of Dennis Quaid, but also giggling and smiling the way that he just owns it.
Yeah, it's not the type of performance where he's not a likable character.
He's not a likable character.
He's dislikable. He's a piece of shit.
He's a piece of shit. It's and it is when I thought about the Tom Cruise Tropic Thunder character, where he is a douchebag.
Yeah. Yeah, Dennis Quaid did a very good job. I'm happy to see that he is working. This seems to be his comeback year because he also is getting great reviews. The movie itself is not. The Reagan film.
Yes.
But he himself, as Ronald Reagan, apparently, I have not had the opportunity to see it, but apparently there is a lot of negativity around that movie, but not when it comes to his performance. Everyone seems to agree that Dennis Quaid, his performance outshines the movie itself, because the movie itself, they say, is not that great.
Yeah.
So this seems to be Dennis Quaid's year, and I'm happy. I'm okay with that. I mean, his son right now is lighting the world on fire, and not to say anything about his son, he is a good actor, but he's not at the level of Dennis Quaid.
Yeah.
He's just not.
Legendary status, no.
Yeah. So it's nice to see when an icon emerges and starts a new branch or a new tier in their career.
It's kind of like the resurgence of, I think, a lot of actors like this, especially around this age group. They're starting to look more like the actors like what Nicolas Cage has done the past like 5 to 8 years, where his resurgence has been meteoric.
Yeah.
And what he's done is basically gone back to the well and went back to being a craftsman and just working his ass off.
He found himself.
He found himself, and he's basically just doing these films that challenge his skill.
Yeah. So when it comes to Demi, I should say. That was the big controversy in the 90s. You say her name right. It's not Demi Moore. It's Demi.
It's Demi.
Well, listen,
Demi.
You can't educate ignorance. I'm ignorant, so I'm just going to say it how I say it.
Yeah.
It might be right sometimes. It might be incorrect the next time. Okay, so her last big film, it's been a while. She was in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
Yes.
Please, Baby, Please. She was in Songbird, Corporate Animals, Love Sonia, Rough Night, Blind, Wild Oats, Forsaken, Very Good Girls, LOL. This is all 2010s.
Yes.
Some in the early 2020s. But none of these are big films.
No.
You know what, Dave? I think this is, without a doubt, her largest, most talked about film since possibly G.I. Jane. That whole era. G.I. Jane and Striptease.
That's a big gap.
This is the most talked about. I mean, she was in Charlie's Angels, the sequel, I believe, Full Throttle, where she played, I believe she was the villain. And that was I believe that was successful mainstream-wise.
But even then, that was like 2003.
Yeah, but right. That was a long time ago. But when it comes, she was also in Mr. Brooks. With that's an amazing movie with Kevin Costner.
But she didn't play a major role in it,
and it didn't generate a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
This movie probably, for her, in terms of discussion, water cooler moments, if you will, the substance is more on par with films like G.I. Jane and Striptease.
Yes, and that's the thing is has Demi Moore been quote unquote keeping herself busy? Yeah. But it's amazing to me that basically people that have heard about substance were like, oh, she's coming out of retirement. No, she's just actually taking bigger and bigger roles now.
Yeah.
Because most of the majority of roles that I remember, the biggest one, when it comes to screen time and presence, the only one that I could think of where she played a big role was 2003.
Yeah.
And that's 20 years at this point.
Yep.
Now we're getting to the point where she's playing front and center. She is the lead.
Yeah. And you know what, David, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this also might have a lot to do with just cultural, societal, and political reasons as to why she went away for a while, because we all know that things are changing in terms of ageism, if you will. In the late 90s, early 2000s, those were the tail end decades of where it was no longer kosher, or it was beginning not to be kosher to not cast women simply because they were past a certain age.
Yeah.
It's a very common discussion in Hollywood that a woman ages out.
Yeah.
Far earlier than a man. And that probably has a lot to do with the reason why she disappeared. Now things have changed, and we're now rediscovering actresses that have gone away because they've aged out.
Aged out.
But now, because we're looking at things differently, there are now new projects for them to recapture their careers.
Yeah, because...
And I think that is part of the reason why Demi Moore is coming back, because culturally speaking, and within the entertainment business, perceptions have changed about aging out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that the standards are changing because a lot of people now are taking notice of that, and you're seeing more and more quote unquote older actresses coming out, because it goes to what I was saying,
or still able to work.
Yeah. It goes to what I've always said in a lot of our reviews. Having a veteran presence really helps your cast, and people now are actually seeing that. And that's just not having a veteran male actor. That goes to being a veteran female actor, because there's a lot of female actors that they may be old, but they hold a presence on scene.
Yeah. Older. Yeah, we don't want to say old. But older. But like, David, because we're up there too.
We're not those Hollywood executive douches.
No, but, I mean, come on. But that's, Demi Moore aging out. I mean, look how that's why I understand Hollywood is extremely superficial. But if you wanted to sell this idea, maybe get someone who doesn't look as fucking pretty as Demi Moore. But maybe that's the message as well. Maybe that's the point. Look she is still fucking gorgeous, and yet according to Hollywood, she's aged out.
And the best thing by far is, like, I remember telling you afterwards, I'm like, are we supposed to say that Demi Moore's not hot anymore? Because, like, she still has a really strong fucking presence in the film.
And that's probably the point. That even a woman who is as beautiful as Demi Moore is considered old in superficial Hollywood or within the culture of beauty standards.
There you go.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about cinematography, which, my God, Dave, some of the best cinematography I have seen in a movie. Well, that's quiet. Let me not be so let me not be so hyperbolic, because great cinematography is all over the place in a horror film. There we go. Great cinematography is common in a horror film, but not as common as, say, some people would imagine. So the way this film is shot is part of its beauty and its aesthetic value, which also, like all good cinematography, it aids in meaning. I could probably, David, you and I both could probably spend the next 2 days breaking down the cinematography of this film. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's built around symmetrical principles, and it exaggerates perspectives while intentionally limiting the viewer's field of view, which, by doing that, it constrains the visible diegesis. And I believe that this technique was intended to create a sense of claustrophobia. That's something you and I talked about when we left the theater, because it heightens the focus on specific details within the frame. So it guides, for example, the audience's attention while amplifying tension and immersion. So by manipulating visual space in this way, the cinematography, led by Benjamin Krakoun, not only serves the narrative, but also enhances the emotional and psychological impact of the scene. Now, I put emphasis on symmetry again here, because I will spoil one scene. It's not really good plot specific, but the way the movie opens is probably one of my favorite openings that I've seen a movie execute in probably, I'll be fair here and realistic, 5 years. That opening is, I mean, how do you say so much without showing very much?
Very much, yeah.
Would you agree that opening, what was that, like a 5-minute, 6-minute sequence where the camera just stood above a Hollywood star?
Yes, but not only that, the choice of cinematography, where it's kind of like, even the choice of shots remind me, I felt like I was in film school again.
Yeah.
Just sitting back and saying, okay, here's this shot. This is what the cinematographer is trying to say with his shot. And those are the quote unquote art house vibes I got.
Yeah.
Because, like, that's how cinematography should be used. It's not simply about, like, setting your camera and pointing at the actor and letting the actor do the storytelling. No. The cinematographer also is able to tell the story. And that's what I like about how Fargeat and Krakoon were able to actually work together.
How can we get cool names like that? Krakoon and Fargeat. Or Fargeat. Is what Fargeat. Can we get cool names like that? Because Sabal and Flores isn't cutting it.
No. It sounds too boring. It's not artsy, Mike. It's not artsy.
And Fargeat. Come
on. But like the choices that they made together as a team is amazing. Like I love the fact that even starting even further back than what you were saying, when the movie starts on, this is probably the one shot that will probably confuse people, a frying pan and eggs. That's it.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, okay.
I forgot about that intro. Yeah, you're
because
right. You're right.
That cinematography itself, while it's simple simple as hell.
Mm-hmm.
You're still telling a story with a pair of eggs. And I'm like going, I'm in film school again. I'm being taught like, okay, how I can do this type of storytelling, not with just actors and a script. I can do it with visuals.
Use the tools.
Use
your tools.
And like, I honestly think Benjamin Krakoon, when it comes to Academy Award winning nominations, cinematography should be up there.
Yeah.
Because like,
I would agree.
A lot of the shots he decides to choose, I'm like going, this is the stuff that all us filmmakers wish to do. How many times have I seen people say, oh man, I want to do a hallway scene that is shot with a noir lighting and deep focal lens.
Yeah.
And Benjamin Krakoon's like, I do that every Sunday. He'll hold my beer.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it is flawless.
It's flawless.
It's flawless cinematography.
And the thing that's so frustrating to me as a filmmaker is watching this, and it's almost like Benjamin Krakoon's like telling other cinematographers, "Hey, I can do this. Why aren't you?" Because like
especially in a horror film. And that's not to denigrate horror films, but the emphasis in horror isn't the aesthetic and the symmetrical. It's usually guided by how are we going to initiate fears, like legitimate fears.
Exactly.
That's the focus of most horror, and it should be. But if you can throw in these other aspects, what you get is the substance.
And it's understanding too of that, those ideas of film, of like how to convey certain emotions with certain choices of shots and certain camera movements.
Yes. Now, David, we do. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Because it's kind of like, and the fact of the matter is, it just seems like him and Coralie Fargeat were on the same page since day one.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, that is something special to actually look at.
That's a power team right there.
That's like a power team movement.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Okay, David, we do need to close out the first half of this show, or I should say just the main bulk of our show so we can move into spoilers. But we will talk about final thoughts here in a moment. But first, Dave, Oscar buzz. Before we close out, let's talk about, I know we talked about it briefly, but let's reiterate so we can say we're either right or wrong come Oscar season. So it's said and proven that we called this in case it happens. Demi Moore and Dennis Quaid nominated? Yes. Is it possible, you believe?
I think it's possible.
Okay. Cinematography?
Absolutely.
Okay. I agree with those three. Directing?
I'm going to say that's where they get the snub.
Okay. Writing?
I'm going to say they get the snub.
Okay. Writing, I'm not sure. It did win the top writing award at Cannes.
But that's Cannes, though.
You are right. And it's a totally different dynamic, the whole type of different politics as well. So that is a valid point, Dave. Best Picture? No.
Unfortunately,
that's not to. We're not slamming it, but this isn't the type of movie that is predominantly considered best picture.
Yeah. And also, when we come down to our spoilers, there's a big reason for me that best picture, you need the entire package.
Yes, save it. Yeah. Don't go any further. Okay, so all right, so we both agree that Dennis Quaid, Demi Moore, as well as cinematography
Yeah,
could
Benjamin
very
Cameron.
well be nominated,
Yes.
logically speaking. Okay. All right, so final thoughts, David. I'm going to give this a 90% on the RMD score. This is being called a feminist horror film, and I would largely agree with that from an academic and or cultural sense, but I don't believe most people will walk out of the film thinking, damn, this film is woke as hell.
Yeah.
It's not that.
No.
This is a classic horror in that it serves to dissect societal concerns and mores. The substance intertwines body horror with cultural commentary, using the doppelganger as a metaphor for the destructive consequences of chasing an idealized self. They do it exceptionally well. This is a perfect example of a well executed and constructed body horror film. And typically, as most of our listeners know, the one type of movie I usually run away from is body horror, unless, of course, it's done by the master, and I forgot his name.
David Cronenberg.
David Cronenberg. I mean, I watch all his stuff because he's just so good. But typically speaking, if someone were to ask me the one horror genre I run from, and it's typically body horror because it feeds directly into my own personal phobias dealing with the body. 90%, Dave. What about you?
I'm actually just a little shy under you. I'm at an 88% with this. Solely because, like, I honestly think if the movie, what we've been alluding to, the 20 minutes of film afterwards, if that was just cleaned up and tightened up, could easily be in the 90s for me. I'm the opposite of you. This is my genre when it comes to horror films. I love body horror films just because it's so much more satisfying as a horror storyteller to do these types of films and not rely on the tropes of horror nowadays, which is the jump scare, the atypical jump scare. This is basically delving into what I love about horror, where you actually dealing with human nature. And that's where horror movies shine the most.
Yeah.
Now, it's the hardest genre to break into because, just as I alluded to earlier, about 50% of like doppelganger body horror movies are terrible.
Really bad. They're like, we're talking
terrible.
D level.
Yeah, they're talking D level.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us horror filmmakers strive for a movie like this. And in a lot of ways, I'm very jealous of Coralie Fargeat's. This is her second go around because Revenge was a great introduction for her.
See,
was a
I need to
great
go.
Introduction.
So you vouch for that film?
I vouch for that film. The only thing I would say is, like, just like how you have like a difference of like likes and dislikes with the horror genre.
Yeah.
Revenge deals with like the revenge tale that has
Is it like female fantasy, that type of thing? Where
No.
I'm talking about female fantasy, meaning like female revenge fantasy. So like Spit on Your Grave. Is it that type?
Yes, it is. I Spit on Your Grave.
Yeah, that stuff's pretty hard to watch.
It's
sometimes.
hard
if you're
for
a
me to
man,
watch.
If you're a man, it doesn't.
It's hard for me to watch because it's kind of like that's a little too ick for me.
Yeah.
And but the fact that this is her second go around is amazing to me because the difference between Revenge and this visually, it's kind of like, I really honestly think Fargeat should look at Benjamin Cameron and says, I'm handcuffed to you now.
No, David, she's handcuffed to me because she's my type.
She's your type.
Just to not be professional at all, David, I'm going to seek her out. And
As funny as it sounds.
Ask her on a date.
As funny as it sounds. I've read more about Coralie Fargeat, and I'm like going, you know that, without giving one spoiler, the neighbor across the way, of Demi Moore's. Yeah.
Hey, Coralie.
Hey,
or Coralie.
How about me and you later tonight?
Dinner. Finger guns.
Finger guns and then disappear. And I'm like going, yeah. That kind of is like, Coralie Fargeat is your type of girl, I think.
Yeah. She's pretty steamy. All right.
Besides that, so it's about an 88.
That's gonna be cut because this movie's like literally about
it's about the
perviness of men, and here I am.
Hey, we embrace it.
Yeah.
We're honest. At least we're honest.
Okay, so let's take a very quick break, and then when we get back, we'll jump into some spoilers. It isn't going to be a very extended section, but it is necessary. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to Critique Revolve. We are in the midst of discussing The Substance. Okay, so for spoilers, David, the part about this film that didn't work is the last 25 to 30 minutes or so, and it has to do with the idea of absurdism. And as I said at the top of the show, I completely understand what they were doing. However, I feel like with how they chose to end the movie, where the monster completely consumes the person, the self, okay? I'm keeping it simple still. And then the monster then goes to this television broadcast where Demi Moore's character was supposed to go to.
And no one noticed.
And she walks into a studio backlot like a complete and utter mess. She is a monster.
Yeah, she's monstrous.
Double heads, arms where they're not supposed to be, boobs where they're not supposed to be. It's disgusting. But no one seems to think it's weird.
Yeah.
And even then, I question whether or not they truly understood what they were seeing, because she stood on stage amongst a bunch of dancers.
Yes.
And the dancers gave her like a side eye, but no one acted like it was bizarre that someone with multiple arms, boobs in wrong places, a head on her back that's open permanently with teeth is normal. And it's not until, for some reason, her body parts start to spray blood. I know why, but I'm not going to get into it yet.
Yeah.
Or at all. Her body starts to spray blood. I believe someone cuts a part of her body off, right? Is that what happens?
She regurgitates like her boob.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so that's right. I wouldn't even say regurgitate. It's almost like she hacks up a boob.
Yes.
She hacks up a boob like a cat hacks up a fur ball.
Yes.
And then blood just starts spraying all over the audience, all over the cameras that are broadcasting this out to the world.
And then that's when everyone screams, "Monster! Yeah, oh my God!"
They start pointing at her. The monster. It feels kind of like Frankenstein.
Frankenstein,
a bit. Like,
yes.
Monster, kill the beast. I get it, but why? Why take a movie that is so beautiful, beautifully constructed, there's an intelligence behind the decisions that are being made, and allow your intellectual piece slip into absurdity?
Yes.
Now, I will say there might be an audience spectator function behind this. Maybe that's the reason why, knowing that she has to also appeal to the horror fans. Because, David, most of the audience in the theater was silent. They were contemplative about the movie. But there were people who were actively involved and engaged during those last 30 minutes. There was clapping. There was laughter. People were now suddenly engaged in the movie.
I was one of them.
Yes. So I'm wondering if that's the reason why. Knowing her audience, knowing that, listen, I want to do something within the body horror genre, but this movie is just gonna be hated if I go too artsy. So let me also play tribute to absurdist body horror.
I think that's what, at the end of the day, that's what it was. Because if you notice, I started thinking about how I was viewing it. I started really loving this film when I looked at it as a film, art house type of film. And you get to that final point where I think, going into a little spoiler, when you get to the fight scene and the end of the fight scene between Sue and Elizabeth, that should have been your ending.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it goes off, it starts going off the rails into absurdity, because then you're having Sue making all these decisions that don't make any sense. And things just happen miraculously that you're like left going, well, how did that work? Those tropes, I started thinking about it because it started wrecking my score of the film.
Yes.
But then I was like going, no, those are tropes that I know happen in what? Horror films. Because that's what usually happens with like the Friday the 13th movies, where all of a sudden you get to the very end and for some strange reason they find a way of putting Jason back into the lake. How? Well, we need this medallion that puts him to sleep, right, and then we'll chain him and we'll throw him into the lake with the medallion.
Right.
just miraculously within the 20 minutes. And all of a sudden I'm like going, okay, I honestly think because I know Coralie Fargeat knows what she's doing, she's not a horror filmmaking hack like yours truly. But because I embrace that, Mike. I embrace the fact that I'm a horror film hack. But like, I know she's not that because of the first 80% of her film was such an intellectual dive into her story and her narrative that I'm like going, okay, this right here, just like what you said, the last 20 minutes was for us fans, to the ones that giggle when you see the most absurd and disgusting things in horror films, because she is in a body. This film was touted as a body horror film piece.
Now I'm wondering if I want to see if your thoughts are the same or different. And we might have mentioned this because we talked about it for a while outside the theater. So we were both trying to figure out how we felt about the movie. And that's part of the reason why I don't like speaking to the PR reps right outside the theater. I know they're very adamant about getting our opinions because they need to get them to the production houses, the studios, what have you. So I get all that. But it just frustrates me sometimes because I want to think.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left the theater, I said, I don't know. I think I don't like it. I believe is what I said.
Mm-hmm.
I understand everything they're doing, but I don't think I like it. But 2 or 3 days later, as I think about it, because this is a type of movie that you do need to think about, I started appreciating it a lot more and say, okay, I get what they're doing. I did, because while I was watching the movie, I enjoyed it up until those last 20, 25 minutes or so. So reflecting on everything that this movie has done, I feel differently than I did originally when I left the theater. And a part of that comes from me pondering what exactly was the purpose of those last few minutes. And I'm wondering if there's something to be said that none of this is real. There was a moment that I don't think was needed in the movie. And it was when she got into a car accident. Now, that aspect happened in the opening 30 minutes, the first act. It's really what set the course of the narrative, like a first act should do. But it also wasn't needed to introduce this idea of a medicine or a cure that you can take. Let's say Ozempic, if you will.
Yes.
I don't think you needed an accident to introduce that idea. You could have done it in literally countless ways. Hey, there's this experimental drug that will actually help you be a better person. It'll bring out the better version of you. The accident wasn't needed for that at all. So what's the purpose of the accident? And if you break down the accident, it is a vicious accident scene.
Oh, yeah.
It is
brilliantly shot again.
Yes. It is a type of accident that you usually don't walk away from. And if you do, you have a broken arm, you have scratches. And when Demi Moore's character was in the hospital, she left the same day.
Yes.
And she had no visible bruising, scars, nothing on her body. So a part of me wonders if she died.
Yeah.
And the rest of the movie is simply this delusion, the fever dream of someone who's holding on to life, that she's dead on the pavement of the street where the accident took place. Or, you know how people see their life before, they say that you see your life as you die.
Yeah.
Your life flashes before your eyes. Maybe that's a version of that.
Yeah.
Then that kind of justifies the absurdity that follows, because even the nature of the drug itself, the movie isn't quite grounded in our reality to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very isolating, lonely, claustrophobic reality.
Yeah.
So a part of me thinks that is really what happened.
As soon as that scene happened, that's where my mind basically... Because the thing I love about this movie is it always had me guessing with every single scene. Like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And when we got to that scene, I kept thinking to myself, she's dead. This is all a fever dream, just like what you said, of someone who's passing away and dying. And then you're going to have the reveal in the end that, oh, we're going to flashback, and this is her just lying in the car still. And then the very final moments is her just passing away finally.
Yeah.
And I was expecting that. When you get to the ending, and I'm like going, it doesn't happen, then the whole absurdity just ruins the rest of the 80% of the film, like I've been saying.
Do you think that the absurdity, the absurdist aspects at the end, do you think that's the implicit way the director was trying to say she's dead? This is a fever dream?
Because it could have, but the problem is, Mike, if she was, if an interview, Fargeat basically says, yes, that was the whole point.
She will never, if she says that she's a hack, directors never explain it.
They never explain, but if like, say for example, if we were having what in film school, like what I have is the one-on-ones where you remember right. We have the teachers talking to us and we go over our story and everything else. And then the teacher gives us our one-on-one. I would actually look at Fargeat and say, then why didn't you actually add that scene? Because but I don't get that. I don't get that feeling by the end.
But do you think that
I have to work up there?
Yeah. Now, David, we are getting into semantics and highly interpretive areas, but don't you also think that if she were to explicitly say something like that, that would also come off as extremely hacky? As the movie fades to black, we see her laying on the concrete dead.
And that's the thing is like it really is down to semantics.
It did work in a movie like Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth because that was also interpretive. She's dying, the little girl, we know that, but does that mean the experiences that we had just seen her live through were not real? Or was that the actual manifestation of this magical realm that she's now escaping to in her death?
Yeah.
So even though they did that, I would categorize that as non-hacky because even though they did something like that, it was still left open to interpretation, which is what is fact and what is fiction. We all know she's dying, but that doesn't mean what we just saw isn't necessarily real.
And a very similar audience feeling I got because I was like thinking about this to try to actually come up with a good review for this film because I do believe it deserves a good review is any film that I could think of where I've left the film with the same feeling like, man, it feels incomplete. That like I left there and I'm like going, oh man, I didn't get the answers I wanted. And a very similar film in this genre, even in body horror, is like David Cronenberg's The Fly, his remake of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. The way he ends the film is also very ambiguous, where it's like, okay, was the fly that creature the monster? Was the monster the man, or was the fly that we see in the very end, was that him in the end? Because like, what was the difference between the man and the monster? That's the story of The Fly, and you're left with that ambiguous feeling. And it's a very similar, my feelings as a viewer of that film is the same feelings I got with The Substance. Is kind of like, well, what the heck, the whole absurdist idea and narrative that they went for the 20 minutes, it felt like, to me, like it was just a fluff piece. Like it was just there to actually...
to deliver on blood.
Yeah. And the same way like a lot of horror films like The Fly, at the very end, you deliver on the blood in the end.
Because also, David, if the movie would have ended where we keep saying it probably should have ended narratively,
I think horror films would have been upset.
Exactly. I feel like horror fans would have been like, this isn't horror. Where's the blood? Where's the violence? And that's why I'm saying I feel like that last bit was there to deliver on those horror fan expectations.
Yeah, it feels like Fargeat was trying to stick with her chosen genre, which she's coming from Shudder Films, and she knows her target audience.
Which is a big difference from, going from Shudder, which has produced some pretty good stuff, but it is a far cry from Mubi.
Yes. And
Mubi is the distributor that picked up this film right after or right before the premiere at Cannes. Mubi is a distributor / streaming service that specializes in the art film for the most part.
Yes.
Or just good films, if you will. Like they cater to people like me, Dave, and you, like just the film fans, people who cinephiles. There you go. All right, David. Well, is there before we close out, is there anything else you must add to the discussion about spoilers?
Well, in regards to the spoilers too, this leads into our discussion of why I think Oscar-wise, the film unfortunately is not going to be nominated for Best Picture. Best Actress, yes. Best Supporting Actor, yes. Best Cinematographer, yes. Best Picture, no, because to me, the film, once the Academy looks at the film, they're going to actually see that 20 minutes and feel that the film is incomplete. Because when you're dealing with Best Pictures, it's about the entire package. The entire package has to be top-notch and perfect. That's how they feel it. And any genre piece, unfortunately, they're going to look at it and says, "Oh, you're mass-produced." That's what happens when genre pieces enter the Academy Award nominations. A lot of those Academy Awards, cinephiles look at Marvel films, sci-fi films, horror films. They're mass produced. They're not meant to be consumed by cinephiles or award nominees. They're supposed to be consumed by mass audiences. That's why basically I feel like the Best Picture category is not going to be for the substance.
Okay. All right. Well, this brings us to the end of our discussion. I want to remind everyone to head over to iTunes, or I should say Apple Podcasts, as well as Spotify. Leave us a review. Give us a thumbs up. Share the show. We need those in order to keep doing these shows, because realistically, I don't know how much longer we can keep doing these. We love them, but we do need the support of our listeners. Thank you, David.
Thank you.